chapel was shrouded in shadows, the tall Gothic arches drawing every sound upward until it was swallowed whole. I sat in the front pew, hands folded in my lap, staring at the coffin that held my husband, Leonard. The man who had walked beside me through 5 decades of storms and triumphs was gone, and all that remained was the hollow weight of farewell. I wore a plain black dress, modest and simple, and on my feet were the shoes Leonard had given me years ago. Their leather was softened by age, their shine dulled. I had chosen them deliberately. They were not just shoes. They were a memory behind me. I heard the hiss of a voice that did not care about reverence or grief, those shoes pathetic. She couldn't even honor him properly. It was Celestine, my daughter-in-law. She did not bother to whisper quietly. Her friends stifled giggles, and the sound traveled like a sharp crack across stone. The guests shifted, unease rippling through the pews. My son, Marcus, seated beside her, murmured, "Celestine, please." But his words carried no strength. He lowered his eyes, unwilling to confront her cruelty in this place. On this day, I kept my gaze on the coffin. To rise to her bait would have been to desecrate Leonard's memory. Still, the sting burrowed deep. Then, a movement in the aisle caught my eye. A silver-haired man in an immaculate suit walked slowly toward me. When he reached my pew, he bowed low. "Madam Harrington," he said in a soft Italian accent, his voice full of respect. Gasps stirred around us. Celestine leaned back, sneering. Probably confused her with someone else. I remained silent, offering the man a nod of acknowledgement. I felt the weight of eyes on me, but I did not move, did not explain. It was not the time. Not yet. The organ swelled, and the service continued. But I sat very still, knowing that this small fracture in Celestine's certainty would be the first of many. And as the chapel emptied, her laughter lingered, feeding the fire already kindling within me. The organ faded into silence, and the minister's voice carried through the vaulted space, steady and reverent. Yet behind me, the sharp edge of Celestine's words sliced again. "Those shoes look like flea market finds." She muttered loudly enough for the nearest pews to hear. Marcus leaned toward her, his face pinched. "Celestine, stop. Please," he whispered. But his plea slid off her like rain on stone. She crossed her arms, triumphant in her small cruelty, certain she had won the eyes and whispers of the congregation. I sat unmoving, my hands folded tightly, Leonard's coffin in my sight. His voice seemed to return to me. As it so often did in moments of weakness, dignity is in truth, not display. Those words had carried us through lean years and lavish ones alike. I let them steady me now, though the sting of humiliation pressed against my ribs. When the service ended, I rose with measured calm. Mourners filed past, their condolences soft and polite. Some gave me pitying looks, their eyes dropping to my feet before darting away. Others nodded with quiet approval toward Celestine, as if her cruel observation had spoken aloud what they only dared to think. Celestine smirked, satisfied. To her, my silence had been proof of defeat. She adjusted her black veil as though she had worn the crown that day. Marcus kept his gaze down, unable to meet mine. I thanked each guest, my voice steady, though my heart quaked with grief. Then I stepped out into the gray light of the afternoon. The air was cool, the kind that settled into bones, but I welcomed its clarity. My car waited at the edge of the lot, a modest 2013 Toyota Camry, its paint dulled by time. I slid behind the wheel, unseen, unremarkable, exactly as I intended. As I drove away, Celestine's laughter still rang faintly in my ears. each note tightening the resolve already growing within me. And when I reached my home in Boston, I knew the time for silence was drawing to an end. The drive from Providence to Boston was quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against the chest. When I reached Beacon Hill, the familiar row of brick townhouses rose before me. Their shutters faded, their charm unassuming. Mine looked no different. And that was exactly the way I had wanted it. Inside, the rooms bore the same modest face. Plain wooden furniture polished by years of use, stacks of old novels lining sagging shelves, a threadbare rug beneath the coffee table. To the outside world, it was a widow's refuge. Nothing more, but in the corner of the living room stood an oak bookshelf. Its spines of Dickens and Bronte had gathered a thin film of dust. I ran my hand along the edge, pressed a hidden latch, and heard the soft click. The shelf swung open on silent hinges, revealing the part of myself I had never shown my children. Not even Leonard's closest friends. My private study stretched before me, smelling faintly of leather and cedar. Cabinets brimmed with contracts, deeds, and patents. On the walls hung photographs of the life Leonard and I had built our first tiny boutique in the 1970s. Ribbon-cutting smiles captured in sepia tones. The expansion into New York. The handshake with Italian craftsmen who became lifelong partners. This was Harrington footwear, not the humble shoes on my feet, but an empire of luxury stores and factories across 2 continents. I stepped to the desk and lifted the shoebox resting there. Inside lay the pair Celestine had mocked that morning, their lines elegant, the leather dark as midnight. They were Leonard's last gift to me, crafted by artisans in Florence, worth $60,000. To her eyes, they were nothing. To me, they were love stitched into every seam. I closed the lid gently, the fire in my chest steady now. Soon, Celestine would learn that every cruel word she had spoken had been aimed at the very foundation beneath her own feet. I crossed to the desk and drew out a small brass key from its hidden nook. The bottom drawer opened with a reluctant creak. And there, wrapped in a leather folder, lay the papers Leonard had prepared but never released to our children. His unpublished will. My hands lingered on the first page, his precise handwriting in the margins. Notes scrawled with the same care he had once used when sketching shoe patterns. One clause stood out, underlined in his hand. If any spouse disgraces the Harrington name, they are to be removed from inheritance. Celestine's name echoed in my mind like a warning bell. She had already crossed that line. And Leonard, even in death, had left me the authority to act. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and his voice returned to me, as it so often did when my resolve faltered. Never confuse kindness with weakness. Isolde, they are not the same thing. A memory rose sharp and bright. The winter of 1974, when Leonard and I sold hand-stitched shoes from a rented stall near Quincy Market. Snow blew in through the cracks, our breath clouding as we worked by lantern light. Customers were scarce, money scarcer. But Leonard kept smiling, kept reminding me that respect for our craft would outlast every hardship. We had built everything from that seed of belief, not for show, not for arrogance, but for dignity. And now, Celestine mocked it all, blind to the very foundation beneath her. I set the folder carefully on the desk. The path was clear. Leonard had trusted me to uphold what we created, and I would not fail him. By morning, the wheels would begin to turn, and Celestine would learn that every insult carried a cost she could never afford. At dawn, I lifted the business phone I rarely used outside of urgent matters and dialed a number committed to memory. Priya Anand answered on the second ring, her voice steady as always. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said softly. Thank you, Priya, I replied. But there's another matter we must address. I need you to pull the file of an employee, Celestine Pierce. There was a brief pause on the line, then the faint sound of typing. Understood. By mid-morning. She returned my call. The records aren't flattering. She began, 3 written warnings for tardiness, several notes about excessive personal phone use, 2 customer complaints for dismissive behavior, and apparently she's been applying her employee discount to items for her friends, which is against policy. I felt no surprise, only a weary confirmation of what I already suspected. Still, the file alone wasn't enough. Check her financials, I said quietly. The next day, Priya arrived at my townhouse with a sealed folder. She laid it on my desk with professional gravity. It's worse than I imagined. Inside were credit reports, bank statements, and public records. Celestine and Marcus were renting an apartment that swallowed nearly all of her salary. Their credit card debt had ballooned past $40,000. A car loan added another $22,000. And most reckless of all, they had just applied for a $4 million mortgage, claiming her pending promotion as proof of income. I shook my head slowly, my hand resting on Leonard's unopened will beside me. It wasn't poverty that drove her cruelty, it was pretense, a hollow performance of wealth, held together with borrowed money and arrogance. Leonard had called it living on stilts. Sooner or later, the ground gives way. And now it was time to see what happened when Celestine's stilts began to crack beneath her. 2 days later, I traveled to New York. The morning air was sharp, Fifth Avenue glittering with its endless displays of wealth. I walked into the flagship boutique wearing a simple cardigan, a plain skirt, and flats so unremarkable that I might have passed for any retiree window shopping on her way to lunch. Inside, the store gleamed. Polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of chandeliers. Associates moved gracefully, greeting clients with warmth, almost all of them, at least. Celestine leaned against the counter, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice carried easily across the showroom. When I'm promoted, I'll finally rule this place, she said with a laugh. Everyone will have to answer to me. Near her stood a woman with silver hair, waiting patiently, a pair of elegant boots in her hands. Celestine didn't so much as glance at her. Instead, she twirled a strand of hair around her finger and continued. And honestly, some of these customers, they don't belong in stores like this. The silver-haired woman set the boots down quietly and drifted toward another associate, who greeted her with a warm smile. I noted the contrast and felt the familiar sting of shame on Leonard's behalf. Our name had been built on respect, and this woman was tearing it apart. When Celestine finally noticed me, she slid her phone into her pocket and plastered on a smile. Mother-in-law, she said smoothly. What a surprise. Are you here to look around? Just be careful. These shoes aren't really for women like you. I returned her smile with calm politeness. Oh, and who are they for? She shrugged, amused with herself. For people with taste. For those who can afford them. I nodded and said nothing, watching as she gestured idly toward a clearance rack. Every word, every action confirmed what Priya's file had already revealed. The time for silence was almost over. And soon. Celestine would see exactly who she had dismissed. The boutique door opened, and Priya entered. Her presence composed as always. She moved past the displays with purpose. Her eyes fixed on me. Mrs. Harrington, she said clearly. The board is waiting upstairs. The title hung in the air. Heads turned. Associates froze mid-step. Celestine let out a sharp laugh. Board, please. She's just my mother-in-law. She waved a dismissive hand as though Priya had mistaken me for someone else. Don't embarrass her like this. I straightened, letting the silence stretch. No. Celestine, I said calmly, my voice cutting through the murmurs. I am the founder and owner of Harrington Footwear. The boutique seemed to tilt in that moment. Gasps broke the air. Whispers rustled like wind through dry leaves. A young associate dropped the scarf she was folding. The silver-haired customer I had seen earlier glanced back, her face alight with sudden understanding. Celestine's smirk faltered. That's impossible, she stammered. You live in a tiny townhouse. You drive an old car. Appearances deceive, I said softly. But respect should not. And respect, Celestine, is something you have never given. Priya opened a folder in her hands. Employee Celestine Pierce, she began, her voice firm, repeated tardiness, ignoring clients, misuse of company discounts, disrespect to colleagues. Each line landed heavy in the room, every associate listening, every customer watching. Celestine's cheeks burned crimson. I can explain. I was just under pressure. I didn't mean I held her gaze. Respect should never depend on wealth or titles. You have shown neither, and for that, your time here is over. Priya slid a document across the counter. Celestine's trembling hands hesitated before she picked it up. It was her termination letter, already signed. The boutique remained hushed. The only sound the rustle of silk as a customer walked past, and I knew the real reckoning would not be here. But in the quiet that followed, when Marcus would have to choose between the illusions of his wife and the truth of his mother, it was evening when Marcus appeared at my door, his face drawn tight, his voice already raised. You humiliated her. Mother in front of her colleagues, in front of strangers. Do you have any idea what you've done? I stepped aside to let him in. His anger filled the modest rooms, bouncing off the walls as if they could not contain it. He paced the length of the rug, his hands clenched. Marcus, I said gently, sit down. There are things you don't know. He shook his head. I don't need to know. I saw the way you looked at her, like she was nothing. I moved to the oak bookshelf, pressed the hidden latch, and swung it open. Marcus froze as the study revealed itself, the cabinet stacked with contracts, the photographs of Leonard and me standing in front of our first boutique, the ledgers heavy with decades of work. What is this? He whispered. The truth, I said, from the desk. I lifted the folder Priya had compiled, your wife's record tardiness, gossip, mistreatment of clients, misuse of discounts. And here I placed another document beside it, our financial review. $40,000 in credit card debt, a car loan, a mortgage application built on a promotion she never earned. Marcus's face drained of color. He skimmed the pages, his mouth working, but no words emerging. Finally, I laid down Leonard's unpublished will. My finger tapped the underlined clause. If any spouse disgraces the Harrington name, they are to be removed from inheritance. Leonard wrote this years ago. He saw what arrogance could do. Tears welled in my son's eyes, anger giving way to disbelief. I didn't know. He whispered. I touched his arm. I won't tell you what to do, but you must decide a life of lies or one of truth. He closed the folder slowly, his shoulders heavy, and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Weeks later, the summons arrived. Celestine had filed suit against Harrington Footwear, claiming wrongful termination and reputational harm. The arrogance in the gesture didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was her certainty that she could win. The day of the hearing, I sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, my presence unnoticed. Celestine swept in dressed in polished black, chin lifted, playing the part of the wronged woman. Marcus followed, looking pale and restless. Though he remained dutifully by her side, her lawyer painted a story of discrimination and personal vendetta, weaving lies into a fabric Celestine wore proudly. But when it came time for our side, Harrington Counsel opened the file Priya had built. Line by line, they laid it out multiple warnings for tardiness, documented negligence, client complaints describing her arrogance in detail, misuse of employee privileges, and records of personal purchases funneled through the company. And then came the testimonies former clients and associates, each confirming her pattern of disdain. Celestine's composure cracked as the pile of evidence grew. By the time the judge dismissed her claims, labeling them unfounded, her face was pale, her reputation shredded in the very city where she had long sought status. I saw Marcus in that moment, the way his shoulders slumped, as though the veil over his eyes had finally been torn. The illusions he had defended so fiercely lay in ruins before him. That evening, he came to my townhouse again, his voice low and heavy. "I filed for divorce," he said, his hands trembling. "I defended someone who never respected you, never respected me, never respected anything. I won't anymore." I reached for his hand, feeling the grief that lingered beneath his resolve. Celestine's collapse was complete, but the wounds she left behind still cut deep, and I knew my task now was not vengeance, but guidance, helping my children find their way back to dignity after so much betrayal. Spring sunlight filtered through the curtains of my Beacon Hill townhouse, gentle and golden. On the windowsill, the roses I had coaxed through winter stretched open, their petals soft and fragrant. I trimmed a fading bloom, replaced the water in the vase, and watched the fresh buds tilt toward the light. Life inside these walls felt quieter now, yet full in ways I hadn't expected. Marcus had taken his first steps toward rebuilding. He worked humbly as a salesman in one of the boutiques, wearing the uniform of an ordinary associate. Each evening he called, tired but lighter, telling me about the customers he helped. "It feels good," he confessed once, "to serve without pretending, to earn something real." Nora, steady and thoughtful, had stepped into her own role. She oversaw the charitable foundation funded through Harrington Footwear, expanding scholarships and programs for children who would never otherwise know opportunity. In her hands, our legacy stretched outward into lives beyond our own, just as Leonard and I had always hoped. And Celestine, her name no longer appeared in society pages. She had become a whisper, a cautionary tale of arrogance consumed by its own hunger. Her silence was the echo of her choices, and I no longer carried anger when I thought of her, only pity. I turned toward the glass case standing in the corner of my study. Inside rested the shoes Leonard had given me, the ones mocked at his funeral. The leather still gleamed softly, every stitch a reminder of love, of partnership, of the quiet power we had built together. "Shoes wear out," I whispered, my hand brushing the glass. "But dignity does not." The roses on the windowsill swayed gently in the breeze, their fragrance filling the room. And I knew, as I stood there between past and future, that this was the true inheritance I could pass on, not wealth, not titles, but respect. If respect were the only inheritance you could pass down, would your family treasure it or squander it?